Great. So we are now live, and I'm here with Dr. Jim Gordon, who is a genuinely legendary figure. I mean, in our age of hype, we tend to often kind of overplay who we're talking with, but you, Jim, are truly legendary, and you're very modest, so no one would quite know that if they sort of sat next to you on a long train ride, or I don't know if we're going to be on long train rides for at least a few more months anyway. But you're an expert, you're a physician, you're an expert in mind-body medicine. Where I got to know you or know a bit about your work, it was in war-torn countries, terrible situations, going in and helping people deal with trauma. And I think your book, which is on my bookcase here, right? It's in the background. Your book is very relevant these days with its extremely helpful title, The Transformation. And in case the fine print is a little too fine, Discovering Wholeness and Healing After Trauma. So I'm really delighted that you're here. I'm going to fiddle with my camera so lightly. And I want to thank you for having this conversation with me.
It's great to be here with you. I always enjoy talking with you. And as far as the subtitle goes, really the challenge is discovering wholeness and healing when we're going through the trauma.
Yeah.
That's what's happening to all of us right now.
Or even not. So obviously we're doing this in the middle of May 2020, in the time of Corona. And before we started, we were saying, you were saying actually, that as someone who has worked in war zones, refugee camps, terrible, difficult situations, Africa, the Middle East, and elsewhere. And your institute, which we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about, is very involved with that. And you have some wonderful online programs that are very available and accessible to people, including those who just totally cannot afford them. So we'll get into a little bit more of that. But you and I were talking about how you experience personal risk these days. You and I are both north of 50. And you were saying that as someone who's been in terrible situations in terms of war zones and all, you actually feel, I'm going to use a technical phrase from my psychology background, you feel more weirded out these days than even in the middle, even while the bombs are falling around you. So can you talk more about that, how this is landing on you, and also how it's a stressor for people to have this invisible invader, to not know who is contaminated or safe around you, and to also live in a time in which what we do today, we won't see the results of typically at a public health level, better or worse, for 10 or 20 days.
Yeah. Well, I think all of that creates a certain, a certain uncertainty that is always there. And if I think about it, it's a big deal to go outside. I have to put on I'm here in Washington, D.C. I have to put on a mask. I tend to put on gloves except when I'm on my porch. I stand on the front porch and I do Tai Chi without my mask on the front porch. And that's a kind of nice way of connecting with people. So it's a situation in which I'm physically vulnerable in a way that it's not so easy to protect against. I mean, can do it with protective gear. Yeah. But if I'm in a war zone, I have a pretty good idea of where to stay to get out of being shot. And if I'm working in a refugee camp, I sort of know the moves and know who to connect with, and I know who the guides are and who can help me figure out where I shouldn't be at what hour of the night. Here, first of all, the messages, whether or not we're able to cut through the fog and the lies of the public messaging, it's out there. It's confusing. What's safe, what's not safe. And so the confusion makes me want to be safer. Yes. And I feel, as you pointed out, I'm over 50. I'm 28 years over 50. I'm 78 years old. And so I'm in pretty good health, but I'm also more vulnerable to, and somehow I'd gotten used to, not that I felt invulnerable if people are, dropping bombs or shooting guns, but I understood the moves. And this is a whole other set of moves that one has to understand, and one doesn't know what's going to happen or what's actually going to protect us. The other thing that we were talking about that's very striking to me is that young, healthy people are getting sick and dying from this virus, and that's not understood enough. So I understand that people who are I'm in pretty good shape, but people who are in much better shape than I am and much younger are getting sick and dying, and they're taking the precautions. So there's a kind of mysterious element to it as well.
One of the things that has struck me, not as a physician, but as someone, just as an observer, is that humanity has a lot of history with epidemics, with plagues. And what has been hard for me to understand has been what's so hard to understand here. In other words, this is a germ in a certain way. It's a virus, right? It wants to replicate. It's infectious. When it gets into people, many days typically will go by, potentially up to even a week, before they realize that they even have it. And meanwhile, they're coughing, they're standing in elevators, they're next to people in line for coffee, they're breathing on people, they're interacting with people, and continually ejecting viruses of various kinds, because it's infectious mainly through respiration,
Right.
including touching surfaces and then inhaling it. Okay, so this is all happening, and if one person infects two people who each infect two people, and just think about how many people we see in a day normally on a subway or in an elevator or going to church, let's say on the weekend. If one person infects two people who infect two people who infect two people, then you get this exponential takeoff. And the next thing you know, here you are, and here we are in America, we're easily north of 90,000 people so far in just America alone. Not to privilege our deaths over those of any other country, but just as a point of comparison, well over 90,000 Americans have been killed by this, clearly, and probably more who we don't know whether COVID killed them, but it did, because they just died. And also other people who weren't killed by COVID, but died because of the way that COVID has overwhelmed the public healthcare system. So it seems fairly straightforward. And the way around it is, as we have observed in very effective other countries, actually Mongolia, not just Iceland and New Zealand and Finland and even Germany, Mongolia has done a great job in terms of dealing with this thing by three things, right? Testing, tracing, and isolating / treating, supporting, right? That's what works. It just seems so straightforward. And so it's very peculiar to me that that's so hard to understand. And meanwhile, stay safe, stay safe for the sake of others. You don't give it to them, and stay safe so you don't give it to people like Jim and me. So what do you make of all this?
Well, I think this is tragic, and this is the tragic consequences of President Trump's total self-absorption, total lack of sense of connection to other people, the people of the United States, let alone the people of the world, and his willingness to focus so much on himself that he's completely blind to what anybody who was what anybody with any intelligence and any experience was presenting to him. And this is it's another example of it's the way he's behaved probably for all of his life, as far as we can tell, and certainly for the last 3 years. And the terrible thing is that so many other people have fallen in line, have embraced this kind of denial, and for them, it's at least partly because they're so anxious. And so they've seen this as he's presenting them with a vision that everything is somehow going to be okay. And in spite of the facts, they're clinging to this vision. And this is, I keep being reminded of that book, that classic book by Leon Festinger, which I'm sure you know, When Prophecy Fails, about the UFO cult, who kept saying, the aliens are going to come at midnight on this date. When the aliens didn't come, they say, well, it's not going to be this date. It's going to be the next date. And they redoubled their belief and they redoubled their commitment to this group and to this belief that they were going to be taken away by the aliens, because they didn't want to lose something that they had become so desperately committed to. In this instance, what I see, what I find tragic and that brings me to tears, is people being out on the street and clinging to this false belief, just as false as those aliens coming, that everything is going to be fine.
Yeah.
And there's without a shred of evidence to support it. And the more they're questioned about it, the more they cling to it. Now, I understand there are reasons, economic reasons. Nobody likes to be told what to do, but we've lost perspective. And I think so a certain part of the country has really lost perspective on what's actually going on, and also on how connected we are to each other. And that's tragic. And it's also affecting the rest of us, because it's widening the divide, I think, between people in this country. Plus, it's also contributing and will be contributing more to the deaths.
More needless deaths. I mean, it's interesting. I'll just kind of make a little point and then slide into something a little more specific that people can actually do. It seems obvious. And again, we're observing this in other countries. We're observing it in South Korea, Mongolia, Finland, Iceland, very disparate countries. The fastest way to loosen up is to get a grip at the front end of this.
Yeah.
Get it under control, contain it, and then kaboom, you can open up again. But to do this sort of sloppy thing in the middle, where you have a little bit of social distancing here, but a lot of people just giving it to each other over there, is the worst of both worlds. So that said, you make me think about vulnerability. And I think one of the things that's hard for people to face about this is the ways that they're dependent upon each other. We are dependent upon each other. And so there's a tendency, I think, to shoot the messenger who reminds us of our interdependence and the ways in which our good is common. I'm a very independent person. Was a registered libertarian for a long time, and there are values there that I personally support to an extent. But at the same time, so much of our fate, especially as we, as tribal animals, face an epidemic, a plague that is spreading within us, we cannot solve it individualistically. We must solve it cooperatively and collectively, which can make many people feel very vulnerable. It's scary to be dependent. And it makes me think about your work with people who have had a trauma visited upon them, or are in situations in which a trauma could occur, or an illness could come. And it really stirs up our feelings of vulnerability. You yourself must have dealt often with feelings of vulnerability, being in situations where there was no rule of law. You were completely dependent upon your guides and good fortune and the little you could do to look over your shoulder, but otherwise you were exposed. So what are some things you have found that about this, about what, including what helps people?
No, I think it's really important point. I think that I know that one of the most important factors in both healing trauma and preventing all the calamitous consequences, psychological, physical, and behavioral consequences, is being able to connect with other people. When we're significantly traumatized, as you know well, parts of our brain that make it easy to connect with other people are at least somewhat disabled.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, we need to use the kinds of self-care techniques that we teach and that you teach to bring us back into balance, so that we can use our imagination, use our intelligence, and also to connect with other people. So there's a paradox. We need to connect with ourselves so that we can connect more effectively with other people. What I'm seeing, and all of our work when we're working in a war zone or after a hurricane or earthquake or after the fires in Northern California, is about bringing people together and having people come together in a large group of a training and in small groups, and just be with each other and learn with each other. And that being together is profoundly healing. Has nothing to do with anybody giving anybody advice. It
Yeah.
has to do with people learning things to understand and help themselves, and learning them with each other. And as we learn with each other, appreciating those connections. Now, I think one of the paradoxes also of this time is that even though we are so separated physically, I am feeling in many ways more connected to other people. I don't know if you've been experiencing that as well. I recognize on a kind of micro level the truth that you were speaking about how the whole world is completely interconnected and interdependent. I'm having dreams about friends I haven't communicated with in a while. And I don't, then people I've never dreamed about before in my life. And they're not these wonderful erotic dreams. It's just like my friend the other night, my friend Tony, who's a musician, he didn't show up at dinner. We're having dinner after one of his concerts. And I'm thinking, where's Tony? And so I'm writing to Tony. Last night I dreamt about my friend who's also named Jim. I've got to write to him. I think that as we're open in this situation, that our unconscious, not just our conscious mind understanding it's good to reach out, that we're getting those messages of how we really are connected with other people, and we need to establish and feel those connections. So, and that's part of our healing.
Yeah. You really, for me, underlining, or this part of the conversation is underlining the importance of being brave enough to feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
The courage to be vulnerable and to be open, and including recognizing our frailty, I don't want to die by essentially suffocating. That's not a happy death. I don't want that, but yet I have a human body. I need to breathe. I mean, we're completely dependent on the next breath and the exhalations of vast numbers of green growing things. So to feel it, there's something about accepting and facing and feeling our frailty, our vulnerability, our dependencies upon others. I think that's really where you have to start. And
I agree with you completely. And I think that if we're paying attention, and most of us have a little more time, not the people who are having to still work two jobs, who are really so excessively vulnerable.
Yeah.
But even those people, they need, in order to survive, they do need to get in touch with that vulnerability and get in touch with as we do that, I feel more in contact with my body now.
Yeah.
I feel that vulnerability. We're all vulnerable. This is real. We always were, but now it's more explicit. It's more immediate. And I agree. The more we spend some time sort of paying attention to the breath, paying attention to what's going on with our bodies, the better care we'll take of ourselves. And also, the other thing that I'm experiencing, and I don't know if you are, is that I'm more appreciative. I'm more appreciative of those breaths, not all the time, but more. I'm more appreciative of each morsel of food that I'm eating, of the sunlight in the morning. It's part, it's there's that famous quote from the 18th century essayist Samuel Johnson about the immediate prospect of being hanged, concentrating the mind wonderfully.
Oh, yeah, no, I think about that. And so it's in real time, Jim, talking this through with you. What is there for me is the shared nature of, on the one hand, letting how it really is for us as individuals to land for ourselves and to feel our frailty, our dependencies, our vulnerabilities, and just how it is, how the time is hard, how it's stressful or scary or frustrating, just all of it. Just whoa, it's kind of like let you land on yourself. Also, a very similar process, I think, is potentially happening now for many, and needs to happen at this time of physical distancing for good reason from each other, is to let others land more fully on us. And my own background a lot is in developmental psychology. I did my dissertation on 15-month-olds, the whole 0 to 3, stage of life. I've done a lot of things with kids. And as you probably know as a physician, there's this stage roughly around 9 months where the infant clearly starts to have a sense that there's actually an independent experiencing being behind the eyes of the other person. It's called intersubjectivity. And I'm thinking these days in particular, as we have more physical distancing from others and we're interacting more in this two-dimensional, odd, screen-based way, it's more important than ever to let others land, to really tap into our capacity for empathy, for intersubjectivity, to feel them and give them the gift of feeling felt, as Dan Siegel puts it. And the two are kind of parallel. We want to let ourselves land, and we want to let the other person land. And we want to be aware of when, as I can see you doing it right now, the other person is actually receiving us in some way. The boundaries are still appropriate. We have our own lives and all that, but still, you can recognize that you are actually landing in that other person. So.
It's a beautiful reminder. And as you were saying that and speaking, I was feeling more connected to you. Yeah. I was feeling, it's like, oh, I'm kind of inside Rick right now. Yeah. And it's beautiful. And so the connection, just that reminder is so important. Mm-hmm. You need to relax.
Yeah.
And I found myself breathing a little more deeply and relaxing.
I know.
And I would encourage everyone who's watching us to do the same.
Yeah.
I mean, take us in. See, that's the thing that we learn. I mean, in all my work, I always say to people, we're all each other's teachers.
Right.
Everybody, not because we're giving lectures to each other, but just our very being has that capacity to teach. And we're learning through our connection and through all the things that we share as human beings. And then we're also learning from the differences. I'm just looking, the lighting, your lighting is different from mine. And my first thought was, well, I'm not sure I like my lighting. And then after a moment, I thought, well, my lighting's just different from Rick's right now.
I live in California, where all the children are above average and the light is golden. You're like an East Coast guy. I think you're in DC, right? Where are you?
I'm in DC, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Unless it's later for you. Well, I want to ask you a deliberately provocative question that, I don't know, could get us in trouble. So I was just suddenly imagining what it might be like for others to watch you and me talking here, and the ways in which you and I are two white men who are older, professional, privileged in a variety of ways. And I was just began thinking about how a person can skillfully let others land and pick and choose, frankly, to some extent. What I want to actually resonate with, what's useful for me, parts that I really don't want to take in, or other parts that I just don't relate to. So turning it around, you've been in situations, I'm imagining, where you rolled in and you were not like most of the people there. You certainly had not had their histories, and yet you needed to find a middle way where, on the one hand, the opportunity for them was not to just dismiss what you had to say because you were really different, or on the other hand, fall into the pitfall of credulously just believing everything you say. Oh, you're the authority. Well, I should listen. But rather to find that place in the middle. And these days, I think it's, with particularly diversity and multiculturalism is a major factor, how we can actually internalize and let land what's useful, what we autonomously judge as useful in another person, while not feeling like we have to agree with everything or take on board everything they've got to say. And I just kind of wonder how you've navigated this.
I think, it's a really good question. For me, the reason I became a psychiatrist is I wanted to be with people when they were going through difficult times, and I was interested in other people's stories.
Yeah.
So when I enter one of these situations with people with different skin color, ages, economic situations, life experience, I'm sort of there and I'm interested in what's going on with them, and I'm there to be of help.
Mhm.
And so people, I think when it's a privileged position to be a doctor. I'm because I can be useful. That's why I wanted to become a doctor. I want to be useful to other people. And people get that. If you want to be number one, if you want to be useful. I remember in being in southern Louisiana just after Katrina, and I was in one of the functioning emergency rooms in one of the East Jefferson Hospital. And there was this big young orthopedic surgeon, strong, good looking, tough, running the emergency room. And I watched and I was so impressed with what he was doing. And I said to him something like, do you really think you need me and my team here? You're doing such terrific work. He started crying. And he said, I'm in the same boat as the people who are coming into the ER. I lost my home.
Mhm.
I'm worried about my kids and my future. We need people from outside.
Yeah.
We need somebody who can hold. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he could kind of hold us while we're going through what we're going through. So that's a role, and people appreciate that. As far as differences in race and age, I never paid too much attention to that. I grew up in New York. Lenny Bruce, the comedian, famously said, "Everybody in New York is Jewish." Well, you could say everybody in New York is Black or Puerto Rican. It's a culture in which you learn the moves and the language. And if you're paying attention, if you're not too dopey or too fearful, and you're paying attention, you get interested. I used to play when I was a little kid. I used to play softball with all the Puerto Rican guys. I mean, they let me play. So they were adults, and I used to play basketball with all the Black guys. So, and I think it's if you open yourself up, if you're genuinely interested, and if people challenge you, just be honest. This is. I remember one time when I was in Gaza, I'd been working there for some years, and one of our Gaza faculty was leading one of the small groups in our training, and he had a family emergency and he couldn't be there. So I took over the small group, and these were people who didn't know me. And one woman pointed at me and she said, "You're CIA. I hear you're CIA." I started. My first response is I started laughing. I said, "No, I don't think so, but okay." So that's how she saw me. And I had to just be real. And once I was there and I was real, she said, after another hour, she said, "No, I don't really believe you're CIA. And if you are, I don't care anyway, because it's good to be with you." So I think that we have gone in some ways too far. We've become much too self-conscious about our race or our color or our religion. People have, obviously, some people have been treated horribly. We have to recognize that. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I was in civil rights movement, and I'd be in Black churches in the South, and the people were enormously generous to me, so kind. And so I sort of I'm always looking for what's possible. I'm always there and just trying to be there with people. And the other thing is you have to be humble about who you are. You're whoever you are. I can't, although I have to say I've never particularly identified with being white, and half my family isn't, but still, this is who I am. I'm this, Harvard educated guy. I am a white
You're
guy,
tall.
white Jewish guy. I'm tall. This is who I am. Okay. So I think that we have to accept ourselves deeply, who we are,
Mhm.
and, not sort of get over ourselves, whoever we are. I mean, I think also, I've watched, this is a longer conversation. I've watched the guilt trips that some people lay on other people and that people take on for themselves. And I really think it's a waste of time. It's
Mm.
not moving. My question is, okay, what are we here to do? What
Mm.
are we here to do? Why are we here with each other? And if you need to, ask me some questions, fine, I'll answer. I'll
Yeah.
answer honestly. And this is where that vulnerability comes in. If you're, I mean, I know it's not that there aren't people who want to, at various times, have wanted to murder me. To be true, most of those people have been white people in my experience, but those
Mm.
people exist. Um, so you
Right.
have to understand, you have to be, Jesus said it, to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. So
Mm.
you need to be careful with the people who really out to get you.
Mm.
And at the same time, you need to be as gentle and loving as you can possibly be. That's all you can do. And other people, you have to, and deal with your own stuff. If you find yourself feeling
Yeah.
contemptuous or prejudiced against somebody, you got to deal with that. And the more I deal with that,
Yeah.
the less problems I have with other people, the fewer problems I have with other people.
Yeah. You know, it's really tricky, and there are different levels about this, right? We could have discourse about what ought to happen in the culture or in policy, and then there's also the level of what's a personal potential takeaway, a personal lesson, and I tend to really focus on that level, just as professionally and also individually. So kind of at that level, what I'm struck by is the balance, really, of there's a Zen saying, nothing left out, everything included in practice, except we always do leave things out, and we must leave things out. And so it's important to include and not leave out that we are leaving things out, including for example, due to our own background and in many cases privilege. We are leaving things out. And I've reflected a lot on, I believe, Ta-Nehisi Coates' definition of privilege, that you do not have to take something into account. All right. And so what do we don't have to take into account because of our good fortune or the ways in which the structures of society, tilt the playing field in our favor? So that part. And it's interesting because then if you bring it down to the personal level, what are we leaving out in our own experience? What are we leaving out in our own consciousness, our own experience? What are we not letting land, as we talked about earlier? Or what are we leaving out in our empathic receptivity to the experience of another person? So for me, what the takeaway is to, number one, really tilt on the side of inclusion and a wider view that is both internally directed and externally directed. Because then we are more inclusive, we're leaving less out, we're braver, and all the rest of that. And in that wider view, have a certain humility and steer clear of the pitfalls of glibness that appreciates the ways in which we will tend to leave things out in our own experience. And we will tend to leave others out, including out of our heart, in part sometimes because of our own privileged or parochial, backgrounds. And so for me, it's kind of a humble takeaway to keep asking myself, what am I leaving out? What am I not including? Who am I not bringing into the room? Who's not in the room? Whose voices are not being heard? Whose styles are not being included? Whose ways of speaking are not being spoken of here? And I've been thinking lately about the importance of speaking the unspoken, both for ourselves and being attentive to opening that possibility in our interactions with other people.
No, it's a good point. As you're speaking, the people whom I think about are the homeless people I see on the street,
Yeah.
and the people who are having to work 2 or 3 jobs and risk their lives during this pandemic.
Yeah.
And what's painful, I mean, their situation is so painful. And what's also painful for me is I can do my job right now from my home. I can do it at a distance. I can communicate with people the way we're communicating. I can do the webinars. I can do groups. I can do trainings. But the reminder to me during this time, as Black and brown and red people are dying at disproportionate numbers, is what should I do? What is to be done? And how can I contribute to creating situations in which those people are not so vulnerable? And the painful thing for me is I can't really do very much of it right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I can do, still talk with the homeless people on the street, have our groups open so people don't have to pay and be helpful to them. But the situation is so much bigger, and I think this pandemic is bringing out the inequities in our society.
That's right.
So dramatic.
The gradually accumulating cost of deferring maintenance of all kinds while also attacking the common good, the common weal. That's the basis of our health. We are unfortunately going to need to finish soon. And I'm watching people comment on Facebook from Poland and all kinds of other really cool places. I want to give you a chance, though, to speak a bit about a couple of your online programs, these online offerings. We'll include information about this in the links and so forth when the recording gets posted. But I wanted to give you a quick chance right now to talk about some of the things that you're doing that people can participate in.
Sure, thank you. You've got me thinking about those people who are living on the street or who are having to work so hard to keep us going and taking all these risks. The work I've been doing really for the last 50 years or so, and more explicitly the last 25 or 30 years at the Center for Mind Body Medicine, is really making available the tools and techniques of self-awareness and self-care and of group support to people who need it most, whoever wants to use them. So right now, what we're doing is all the work that I would ordinarily be doing in person. Right now, I would probably be in Central Asia working with countries who are dealing with returning ISIS fighters and their families. But I can't go to Central Asia, so we're getting ready to do workshops for them. So we're bringing all this very powerful, intense, in-person work that we've been doing out in the world for all these years, finding a way to bring it online. And there are several ways that we're working. One is we have what we call mind-body skills groups, which are led by we have 140 faculty. I think about 60 or 70 of our faculty are leading these groups right now. And people are, coming from all over, a lot of frontline healthcare workers, people who have COVID-19, people who've lost family members. They're joining these groups. And these are an opportunity to learn skills that you can use for yourself, not only now, but that can become a basis for a kind of a healthier, more productive, more loving life. And if people can pay, there's a fee. It's $375 for 8 2-hour groups. If you can pay less, please pay less. If you can't pay anything, you're welcome. No fee required. So that's one. And those groups are going on at the center, and there are many hundreds of those groups going on all over the United States. I don't even know, we're counting them up now, probably close to 1,000 of those groups, different places.
Yeah, that's great.
And we want to have more. These are people whom we've trained in our training program. We also have webinars. I'm doing webinars every week and Facebook Live question and answers every week. And those are completely free to everyone. We'll probably have some in the future on work. I'm mostly focusing on work that people can do, that adults and teenagers can do. We'll be having some for people who are concerned about what their kids are going through. And people have to look at the website, cmbm.org. My book, The Transformation, Discovering Wholeness and Healing After Trauma. Thank you, my fellow author, with gratitude. So that book gives people, you can buy it inexpensively online, gives you a complete program for self-healing, and also some guidance in reaching out to other people. The other thing that we're doing is...
By the way, I just want to say, Jim, I've never seen a book endorsed by Archbishop Desmond Tutu before, as well as John Kabat-Zinn and Mary Pfeiffer and other noteworthy people. And so I just want to mention to people that you are in very good company.
Thank you. Thanks for mentioning. Yeah, friends. They're on our advisory board, John and Archbishop Tutu. So thank you, Rick. Yeah, they're beautiful. We're all in this together. That's the other thing, is you and I, the people who endorse my book, your book. I mean, we're all connected to each other. That's a next stage too, that we need to talk more about, what we can all do as we come together. One of the things that I'm doing more of, and that we're doing more of, is consulting with hospital systems, with whole communities. Groups of physicians have reached out to me, national hotlines. And so if we have people who are watching us now who are part of groups who would like to incorporate some of what we have, that I have to teach, what we have to teach at the Center for Mind Body Medicine, we're making more and more of those partnerships. I think this is a time when all of us can come together much more, and right now doing what, exactly what you and I are doing, and then thinking about what we may be able to do as time goes on, and as we have a little more freedom to move. So I'm glad to share what we have to share as best we can now, and I welcome other opportunities. So it's not only what I have to give, and we at the Center for Mind Body Medicine, cmbm.org, have to give, but also what other people want to share. This is, we're all in this together.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. And as always, I really appreciate your large heart and your just wisdom and background. And one of my own takeaways from this time is the blinding clarity that we need to invest in ourselves individually, and we need to invest in ourselves collectively as a community in terms of the common good. And what's been exposed by this time are the results of that lack of internal investment and various psychological strengths developed over time, such as management of the mind and body system, and also the cost of not investing in the threads that can really knit the fabric of our society together. So Jim, thank you again, and blessings to you, and bows your direction. And thank you, my friend, for doing everything you do.
Thank you so much. It's always great to talk with you. I look forward to next time.
Oh yeah, definitely. There will be one. I can tell from the interest in this. So I'm going to end the broadcast. We do post the recording of this for those who wonder. And I think that's pretty great. Okay, over and out. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.